Hey everyone, welcome to another Patreon topic video. This one was supplied by Gus. Is a spicy topic, no doubt about that, but I don't shy away from spicy topics if they're requested, and I think this is an important topic to talk about, and one that I have definitely wanted to start addressing going forward. And the topic is, what is the history of the division between the arcade scene and the Touhou scene? Why are these scenes separate from each other? Why isn't there more crossover? Why isn't there, why don't we share leaderboards? Why don't we share? Because Touhou are shmups, and the arcade shmups don't ignore other indie shmups, right? We're not ignoring Blue Revolver or Zero Ranger. We're not actually just focused on the arcade. So why isn't there, because both crowds are pretty big, and Touhou seems to be potentially even bigger than arcade. So why isn't there a crossover, or more of a crossover? I guess I should clarify. So to get started with this topic, obviously a lot of what went down predates myself, and so I went around and asked the more experienced veteran players that I know their insight onto this issue. I even joined the Touhou server and asked around in there. I didn't get a whole lot of progress, but I gave that a shot anyway. I'm not well known there, so they're not gonna bother too much with me. I wouldn't think. So anyway, at least to try and explain what I think has happened and what people have told me has happened. So what's interesting about Touhou versus arcade is that Touhou, from what I understand, actually developed its own scene independently of the arcade scene, and I think there's a lot of evidence to support this. So unlike Blue Revolver, unlike Zero Ranger, unlike Rolling Gunner, other indie shmups, Death Smiles if you're thinking like Moe stuff, but unlike all those shmups which were targeted at the shmup crowd, which were targeted at the arcade scene, Touhou, I must imagine at some point it was targeted at shmup players, right? It's a shmup game. But you'll see, and I have some supportive evidence of this, is that Touhou actually managed to bring in this entire different crowd of people that were not the shmup fan base, that were not like the hardcore Cave STG forum, Shmup System 11 forum, the farm type crowd. It was a whole separate crowd, and from what I understand, with my limited knowledge of the anime community, anime scene, I was watching a Digibro video the other day, and he mentions Touhou and talks about Touhou, and he has, a knowledge of the Touhou games and stuff like that. But where he's coming from, he's not coming from a shmup player's perspective, he's coming from an anime fan's perspective, right? Where, Touhou kind of fits into that crowd very well, and that's one reason why it is so much more well known and popular than a lot of the arcade shmups, is because it's within a much larger demographic of people that's independent of arcade. So what happened, again, this is what has been reported to me, is that when Touhou started getting more and more popularity, and it was starting to be shown that these games are, legit shmups, they're actually pretty good, the arcade scene, from what I understand, did not really value Touhou games and kind of thought of them as crappy gimmicks, not good. The gameplay's not strong. They're not quality shmups. They're a novelty. That's kind of what I'm understanding. And so there was a big division there where the arcade players felt, Touhou games, they're just a novelty. They're just this anime game. Like, I guess an example would probably be something like, how the fighting game looks at the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games? The Dragon Ball Z Budokai games, I actually enjoy them. I think they're fun in their own weird, janky way. But, yeah, up until, funnily enough, DBZ Fighters, right, which kind of brought in some of those elements, but up until DBZ Fighters, yeah, the appeal of the Dragon Ball Z fighting games was not they were fighting games, it was that they were anime games for Dragon Ball Z fans that were operated on the premise of being a fighting game. And I liked it. I'm not trying to throw shade at these games. I think they're pretty fun. But I'm saying, the FGC did not consider Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 or Budokai 3 a real fighting game, right? They were more just commercial games for the anime fans. They were fit for fans, not for the fighting game scene. I think that is kind of similar to how shmup players were viewing the Touhou games at first. They looked at them and they said, these are Dragon Ball Z type games. You know, these aren't, or like the Macross shmups. Some of them are actually pretty good, but a lot of them aren't that good. It's kind of like that. It's like, oh, they're like Macross shmups or something. They're not, the real deal. And that took a long time for, and I don't know if it's totally even sunk in, but at this point, it's hard to deny for shmup players, even people who don't like Touhou games, that yes, these are legit, these are real, really well-made games, most of them anyway, and that they have just as much depth and scoring as most of our games, It's just there's just been that divide for so long that now the two scenes aren't together. And so on the Touhou side of things, from what I understand, is Touhou players, again, a lot of them are coming in. And this is hard to deny just by the sheer numbers, because when look at the Touhou Reddit, for instance, you look at how huge that is, you're like, there is no way all these people are shmup players, because they would totally dwarf the shmup scene if that were true, right? They'd be 5 times larger, 7, 10. They'd be so much larger than the shmup scene if all of these people were shmup players. But they're fans of kind of the anime aspects of Touhou, so they're more along the lines of anime fans. Not everyone, though, right? And then within the Touhou scene, there's a sub-scene of the players. And so this is the demographic that, moving forward, I don't mind the anime fans either, but I'm saying, I feel like moving forward there needs to be that integration, or at least a little more integration between the shmup players, especially like Cave games, right? Because Cave and Touhou, they're not the same, but they have a lot in common. A Cave player probably can appreciate Touhou. I know I do. And I think Touhou fans can appreciate Cave games. I think there's definitely an overlap in game design there. So my goal is to start bringing these people closer together. And there are now, speaking of the arcade shmups, there is a much more overlap now than there has been in the past. Because many of our greatest players are Touhou. They came to us through Touhou. The Touhou is a great way to bring people into shmups. It's like and you're wondering, like, why is my How to Play series a Touhou game? Well, I explain in depth why that is. But another good reason why is because Touhou is what pulls a lot of people into the genre. Not everyone, but we're getting a lot of people coming in through Touhou. And so it can be that bridge between playing Touhou games, which are shmups, and then playing arcade shmups, cave games, and stuff like that. And then even classic, they can go that far. I know Pearl, he loves classic shmups, and he came in through Touhou. He's a great Touhou player, so it can happen. So I think a marriage between the two scenes is extremely useful moving forward. I guess other issues within the Touhou, the division between Touhou and arcade, that I think would be interesting to discuss is the aesthetic differences. And I see on both sides not quite seeing eye to eye on the aesthetics. So let's start with the classic, like the shmup players who hate Touhou's aesthetics, who despise them because they're very moe, they're very anime, and then there's the whole little girl aspect to it, which is off-putting for many Western players, right? Because our feelings towards having the main characters be little girls is kind of like, that's very unusual to us. It's kind of strange. And then there's always like that kind of a weird, smaller subset of Touhou that's porn related and stuff that can kind of, from what I understand, I'm not a Touhou expert, but from what I understand, that is definitely not where Zun is coming from. But, that's just gonna happen. It's the anime scene. That happens with every anime, right? Doesn't matter what anime it is. But that kind of is well known, so it off-puts the Western players where they kind of view the main series as kind of like being involved with that in some way. So there's that division there where the aesthetics of Touhou the moe style, and then there's also just the fact that Touhou's art style, even among anime fans, hasn't evolved that strongly when you compare it to other anime games. It's not like Guilty Gear where it's like the visuals are insanely good and they're improving a lot. Touhou visuals kind of are they're not bad, but they're kind of like static, they're not improving with the times. They're kind of a little bit stuck in the past in my opinion. Except, the fan games are starting to improve that, but yeah, so there's that. There's the aesthetic difference, and then there's also kind of the, this is an interesting topic that I've discussed before too, is that there's kind of the shift within even people who like anime, right? Where in the 90s, early 2000s, 80s, the anime aesthetic, you can look at popular anime from these times to see that, is that like mecha anime, that hardcore military, Ghost in the Shell, Robotech, I guess Macross, right? Evangelion, that sort of style. And then anime after that period, kind of around the Touhou era of things, starts to become more moe, become a little more cutesy and stuff, and that's like caught on. So there's also that aesthetic difference as well. And so there's a lot of reasons for the division there, where it comes down to, again, there are two separate crowds initially, and then what they're into doesn't quite overlap. And then there's the people who, there's a subsection of each though. There's a subsection of Touhou players who are there to play the games, and I'm sure they enjoy the aesthetics and everything like that, but their main focus is the gameplay. And then those people are basically shunned and ignored by the arcade players who basically feel they're playing Dragon Ball Z Budokai. It's like, who cares if you're good at Dragon Ball Z Budokai? It's not a real game. And then there are the really strong Western players who maybe would get into Touhou for the gameplay, but then they're put off by the aesthetics. They're like, whoa, these aesthetics are not... I'm looking for some mecha cyberpunk stuff, and this is like moe cutesy anime that's not for me. So then there's that demographic that gets cut off. So there's actually, it's just kind of funny, it's just like a pile of barriers between the two. And then again too, a lot of people getting into Touhou, perhaps like Digibro, who seems to know a lot about Touhou just from this video I was watching where he's just kind of talking about it. I follow his stuff. I've never heard him talk about any other shmups, cave games or anything like that. He might, for all I know, he might like them and know about them, but it doesn't overlap with his audience, right? And so I think a lot of Touhou fans are there because they're actually anime fans or kind of fans of that sort of stuff, and so they're not going to take the plunge into shmupping, hardcore shmupping, which is like a totally separate set of interests. But the good thing is, I think moving forward, Touhou is getting recognition among arcade players, especially now. Jamers, Juju Kenobi, a lot of the really good Western players, Violet Hat Purple, a lot of good Western players. There's many more, right? That began in Touhou, and then there's the Touhou scene. I think as we become more popular, more of them will start to notice us and be like, "Oh shit!" Like, there's this whole shmup scene outside of Touhou that they probably don't even know about, to be honest, or don't seem that interesting. So I think that gap is closing, and it's one of my goals to close that gap more, to where the two scenes, especially the players, hardcore players of each, start to overlap more. So I think that's basically the reason for the division. I'm sure there's lots of drama in there involved as well, beyond just that. So anyway, I'd like to thank my patrons: Dingo, DBL Vision, Dunpeel 2064, Full Set, Retro Shmupper, Gus, the man of the video, Himmel, Kiwi, Jake Ryan, Joe Angelo, K, Kino Tosi. I'm sorry, Kino, let me know how to say that. Mark Sloan, Maz, Nathaniel Davis, Annie Electron, Plasmo, Psych, and Young Money Sweet. Thanks for watching.